The stars never seemed to listen. For over a century, humans had shouted into the dark, pouring radio waves and data streams into the silent ocean of space. They received only silence in return, a quiet so profound it fed a deep, quiet loneliness in the species. Jin-Woo felt that quiet every night. His job at the Korean Deep Space Array on Jeju Island was to listen, to watch the scrolling lines of data on his screen, mostly cosmic static and the predictable pulses of dying stars. It was peaceful work, but sometimes in the long hours before dawn, it felt a little like being a prison guard for an empty cell. Tonight was supposed to be like any other. The large control room was dark, except for the glow of monitors. Subin, the junior data analyst, was at the next station, sipping tea. The soft hum of the massive dish arrays outside was a constant background noise. Then the anomaly appeared, not as a blaring alarm, but as a subtle shift in the noise floor on Jin-Woo's main spectral display. A band of frequencies, previously empty, now showed a structured rhythmic pulse. It was not a simple repeating signal. It was dense, complex, a river of data so vast it made Earth's entire internet look like a single drop of water. "Subin," Jin-Woo said, his voice calm but firm. "Come look at Sector 7. Tell me I'm not tired." Subin rolled her chair over. Her eyes, reflected in the screen's light, went wide. "That's not a pulsar." "No," Jin-Woo agreed. He ran a series of filters, isolating the signal. It was unlike anything in the catalog. It wasn't directed at Earth. It seemed to be. Everywhere. A carrier wave for the galaxy itself. As he listened through a basic audio translation, a shiver went down his spine. It was not a message. It was a conversation. A billion conversations layered over one another, a tapestry of thought and data exchange, passing through space like background radiation. Humanity had just learned to tune into the galactic broadcast band. "We need to call Captain Lee," Subin whispered, already reaching for the secure line to the orbital defense platform Gyeongbok, but Jin-Woo was already diving deeper. There was a second layer, a reflection. Buried in the immense alien data stream was a familiar, heartbreaking signature: human broadcasts. Old television shows, radio dramas, digital network packets, scientific data, everything they had ever sent out was coming back. But it was not a simple echo. He pulled up a clip from a vintage Korean drama, one his grandmother loved. It was returned with a cascade of symbols and layered annotations flickering at the edge of the transmission. Jin-Woo's breath caught. It wasn't subtitles. It was analysis. Metadata of a kind he could barely comprehend. Tags for emotional resonance, cultural context markers, notes on social structure and linguistic evolution. The aliens weren't just watching their shows. They were studying them like profound works of art. "Captain Lee is on alert," Subin reported, her face pale. "He wants to know if it's a threat." "I don't know what it is," Jin-Woo said truthfully. He opened another file, a random snippet, a public access feed from a park in Seoul, showing children playing, an old man feeding birds. The return data was immense. The simple scene was annotated with observations on biomechanics, social bonding patterns, analyses of laughter as a complex communicative tool, and a strange, reverent note on the unplanned aesthetic of organic movement. This wasn't first contact. This was finding out you've been living in a glass box in a museum for centuries. And the visitors have been taking detailed, admiring notes the whole time. On the orbital platform Gyeongbok, Captain Lee watched the reports from Jeju Stream onto his command screen. His was a world of clear threats and defined protocols. Asteroids, orbital debris, hostile satellites, these were things he understood. This was something else. A signal that treated humanity's entire output as a library to be cataloged. No directed transmissions? He asked his comms officer for the third time. None, sir. They are not talking to us. We are. Overhearing them talk about us. It is a systemic broadcast, galaxy-wide. Earth's transmissions are being caught in it, analyzed, and the analysis is leaking back into our receivers. Captain Lee leaned back in his chair. A threat assessment made no sense. A species with this capability could have done anything. This was something else. It felt like being evaluated. He did not like it. Down on Earth, the call went out to Mene. As a leading exobiologist and first contact theorist, she had trained for this moment. She had prepared for strange languages, cryptic symbols, or even hostile gestures. She arrived at the KDSA facility by dawn, her mind buzzing with protocols. Jinwoo showed her what they had. For an hour, she said nothing, scrolling through the annotated returns. A pop song was analyzed for its mathematical harmony and its reflection of adolescent social anxiety. A war documentary was tagged with intricate notes on conflict theory, tragedy, and a sorrowful observation on wasted energetic potential. Finally, Mina spoke, her voice soft with awe. They're not judging us. They're appreciating us, but not the way we appreciate ourselves. They see our whole messy history, our art and our wars, our love songs and our news reports, as a single breathtakingly complex creation. She pointed to a tag on a broadcast of a symphony. Look, they call this a structured vibrational expression of mourning and hope, species-specific. Intensity level 9. They're measuring the emotional intensity of a Beethoven symphony. But why show us? Subin asked. If they've been watching in secret, why let us see the notes now? Jinwoo brought up the root signal again, the galactic river of data. I don't think they did. I think this is their normal communication network. It's like they use a frequency that travels through everything. We just finally built an antenna sensitive enough to not only hear the signal, but to see how our own data is processed within it. We haven't intercepted a message. We've plugged our headphones into the wall and can hear the whole building. The realization settled over the room, heavy and immense. There was no ship, no ambassador at the door. They had simply, quietly, opened their eyes in a dark room to find it was an auditorium, and they were on stage. And the audience, a galaxy-wide audience that had been watching for generations, had just realized the performers could now see them in the seats. Mina looked at the main screen, where a simple image of Earth from space, a common public domain photo, was displayed. The annotated return flickered beside it. The tags were not about mineral composition or atmospheric chemistry. They were things like fragile biosphere gem, cradle of contradictory brilliance, source of unpredictable fervor. They're in awe, she whispered, the truth of it dawning on her. They're not scared. They're not superior. They're stunned. Outside, the first rays of the sun touched the massive dishes of the array, turning them to silver. They were no longer just listening into silence. They were listening to the stunned, silent awe of the galaxy, reflected back at them in a mirror they never knew they were holding up. The silent awe was a wave, and it crashed over Earth not with a roar, but with a profound, breathless quiet. The world learned the truth not from a presidential address, but from a slow, inexorable leak of data. The analysts at the KDSA, led by Jinwoo and Mina, could not contain what they were seeing. They shared fragments anonymous, stripped of coordinates, with the global scientific network. It was too big for any one country to hold. Within days, the story was not about aliens, but about the mirror they held up. News channels showed side-by-side comparisons. On the left, a famous painting, or a clip from a classic film, or a photograph of a crowded market. On the right, the cascading, flickering annotations from the galactic record. A simple image of a mother hugging a child contained over 100 meta tags. nonverbal bonding ritual. Chemical trust indicators visible in facial microexpressions. Protective gesture. Roots in prehistoric pack behavior. Aesthetic harmony in the pose suggests unconscious cultural art norms. People sat in their homes, watching their own culture be dissected with a precision no human scholar could ever achieve, and with a tone of pure, clinical wonder. In a small apartment in Seoul, an old woman watched a replay of her favorite historical drama. The annotation for a scene of quiet sacrifice read, "A demonstration of perceived duty, overriding personal survival instinct, a rare and intense evolutionary paradox." Emotional yield. Profound. She wept, not understanding the science, but feeling, for the first time, the staggering weight of the love the scene was about. The aliens saw it not just as a story, but as a data point proving humanity's beautiful illogic. On the Gyeongbok, Captain Lee monitored the global reaction. His screens showed not military movements, but social media sentiment analyses, news channel outputs, and economic indicators. There was panic, yes, but it was being drowned out by a stranger or powerful reaction, a global identity crisis. The weapon systems under his command felt suddenly absurd, like bringing a knife to a poetry reading. His enemy, for so long imagined as a hostile warship, was a footnote in a galactic art critique. "Captain," his communications officer said, her voice strained, "we're getting a request from the International Space Station. They're asking if we can point our tactical scopes at a specific deep space coordinate. Not to fire. To look at what? The source of the carrier wave. They want to see if they can see. The audience." Lee authorized it. The powerful lenses of the Gyeongbok turned from watching Earth to looking out. They saw nothing, of course. No armada, no planet-sized alien eye. Just the deep, quiet black. But the act felt significant. They were no longer just looking for threats. They were trying to meet the gaze of the watchers. Back at the KDSA, the work shifted. Jin-woo and Su-bin were no longer just detecting a signal. They were translating a culture of observers. Mina led the effort to interpret the annotations. "Their own communication is perfectly efficient," she explained to a room full of stunned linguists and scientists on a video call. "But their analysis of our works, it's filled with concepts they clearly don't experience firsthand. Look at this tag on a piece of blues music. Sonic articulation of sustained melancholy with rhythmic hope core. They understand sadness. They understand rhythm. But hope core? That's a constructed word. They had to invent a term for the human tendency to embed resilience within despair." Jin-woo found the most humbling examples. He focused on the most mundane human data. A satellite image of city traffic at night, returned with tags about organized energetic flow patterns and collective unconscious navigation. A recording of a busy restaurant, annotated as a complex nutrient intake social ritual with high-density acoustic bonding signals. "Their civilization," Jin-woo said one night to Mina, as they pored over data, "must have solved all its problems. No hunger, no war, no conflict. Their art must be perfect, harmonious, and then they see us. We are chaos. We are screaming one minute and singing the next. We build hospitals and bombs with the same hands. And they don't see it as a failure. They see it as," he struggled for the word, "as art," Mina finished. "The most vibrant, dangerous, unpredictable art in the galaxy. We're not a failed version of them. We're a forgotten genre." Subin made the discovery that made the abstract shock personal. She had been running archival broadcasts through the analysis filter. She fed in a short, grainy clip from a decades-old personal camcorder. It showed a little girl in a park, trying to fly a kite. The kite crashed repeatedly. The girl grew frustrated, then determined. Finally, a gust caught it, and the kite soared. The girl's face broke into a triumphant, gap-toothed smile, jumping up and down. The clip was 20 seconds long. The annotation that returned was not a cascade, but a single, dense packet. Subin decoded it and read it aloud, her voice trembling. Subject: Young Homo sapiens. Displays iterative failure response protocol. Initial output: frustration, energy discharge. Secondary output: determination, energy redirection. Tertiary output: adaptive technique adjustment, learning. Eventual outcome: successful harnessing of atmospheric dynamics for non-utilitarian joy. Note: the final facial expression and kinesthetic response. Triumphant joy represents a neural reward mechanism of extraordinary efficiency. This sequence, from failure to ecstasy, is a microcosm of the species' anomalous evolutionary driver. It is not the success that is unique. It is the value placed on the success after the struggle. This story arc is the core narrative of their planet. Archive with maximum priority. They sat in silence. The aliens didn't just see a child with a kite. They saw the entire human story, the struggle, the failure, the brief, shining moment of victory, and they considered it the most important thing to save in their records. The news of the kite annotation spread. It became a symbol. People looked at their own struggles, their small failures, and hard-won victories differently. They were not just personal moments. They were data points in a galactic masterpiece. The world held its breath. The silence from the stars was no longer empty. It was the attentive, waiting silence of a student who has just been shown something miraculous by the teacher and has no words to respond. The galaxy had spoken, not with a hello, but with a gasp. And now it waited to see what the work of art would do next. The silence stretched into a week. The global conversation, once a cacophony of fear and wonder, began to settle into a low, constant hum of shared disbelief. The world was waiting, but for what? There was no ship to hail, no signal to reply to. Humanity was like a person who had overheard a glowing review of their life from strangers in the next room, and now stood frozen, unsure whether to step out and say hello. On the Gyeongbok, Captain Lee's tactical screens remained stubbornly blank of threats. But his political screens were a storm. Every nation, every alliance, wanted a plan. They demanded he find a way to secure Earth's position in this new reality. He had nothing to offer them. How do you negotiate with an audience? His answer came not as a blip on a radar, but as a gentle, persistent wrongness in the light outside the observation deck. He was called by a breathless junior officer. "Sir, you need to see this. It's not on any instrument." Lee floated to the large viewport. Against the velvet black of space and the brilliant curve of Earth, there was a distortion. It was like looking through old glass, a faint shimmer, a bending of the starlight. As he watched, the distortion began to resolve. It was not a ship. It had no hard edges, no engines, no hull. It was a complex, slowly turning shape made of light, like a frozen firework or a crystal grown from pure energy. It pulsed softly with a rhythm that felt oddly familiar. After a moment, Lee realized it was matching the rhythm of the carrier wave from the galactic record. This was not an arrival. It was an appearance. A presence making itself gently visible across Earth. Every telescope, every satellite, every array like the one on Jeju turned toward the silent visitor hanging in high orbit. It made no move, emitted no directed signal. It simply was at the KDSA. Mina and Jinwoo watched the visual feed. The mundane control room felt suddenly holy. "It's an avatar," Mina whispered. "A projection. A way for them to say, 'We are here, and we are paying attention. They've made a face we can look at.'" How do we talk to it? Subin asked, her voice small as if in answer. The communication did not come through speakers or screens. It appeared in their minds. It was not a voice with words, but a clear, cool stream of concepts, images, and understandings that settled into their consciousness with the certainty of a remembered fact. The concept was apology. It was followed by a flood of context. They saw, in their mind's eye, the galactic record not as a spy tool, but as a natural, ambient network, a shared consciousness of a civilization, so advanced that individual thought and broadcast thought were merely the same. Observing planets like Earth was a passive act, like humans watching an anthill. They never expected the ants to look up and see the scientists, or to understand the notes being taken. The next concept was embarrassment, a feeling of profound social awkwardness. Galactic in scale, they had been caught staring, and their meticulous notes had been spilled out for the subject to see. It was a breach of etiquette they had no protocol for. Finally, the clearest concept formed, tinged with a wonder so deep it felt like sorrow. Question. A single poignant inquiry unfolded in Mina's mind. It was not about technology or resources. It was an image of a human heart, not the organ, but the symbol. It was shown cracking with grief one moment, glowing with love the next, soaring with ambition, and clenched with fear. The question was simple. How do you contain such weather without tearing apart? Mina found herself speaking aloud, knowing the entity would understand. We do tear apart, she said, tears she didn't understand filling her eyes. All the time. That's what the art is. That's what the stories are. It's the repair, the putting back together differently. A sense of profound consideration flowed back. The light being in orbit seemed to pulse slightly brighter. Captain Lee, on the Gyeongbok, received his own direct impression. It was an image of his own command console, of the weapon status reports. Then, an image of a painter's brush and a sculptor's chisel. The connection was clear, and the feeling attached was not condemnation, but a gentle, bewildered curiosity. You guard the studio so fiercely? Lee, a man of duty and protocol, felt a lifetime of assumptions crumble. He sent back, with all his will, not words but a feeling. The feeling of holding his child for the first time, a terrifying, wonderful vulnerability. The need to protect that which is fragile and beautiful. He showed the chisel as a weapon, and the weapon as a brush. Both tools of a species they could create and destroy with the same terrifying passion. From the entity came a wave of understanding, and with it a new soft awe. They saw the connection. The fear was not separate from the love. They were the same root. The emissary, as humanity began to call it, initiated a new phase. It began to transmit a gift. It was not a stream of data this time, but a direct sensory experience. To those who turned their minds toward it, it offered a glimpse of consensus art. Mina saw it. It was a symphony of light and form, perfectly harmonious, mathematically sublime. It evoked a deep peace, a stillness like a perfect frozen lake. It was beautiful, and after a few moments of experiencing it, she felt a deep, aching loneliness. It was flawless. It had no rough edges, no surprises, no pain, and therefore no release. It was the sound of a species that had answered every question and smoothed out every wrinkle in its soul. When the transmission ended, Mina was crying freely. She understood now. They were not gods looking down on primitive humans. They were master artists who had perfected a single, serene note and had just heard a wild, chaotic, glorious symphony for the first time. They were not here to teach. They were here to listen. The emissary's final concept of the day bloomed in the minds of the contact teams across the planet. It was an image of two hands. One hand was smooth, made of cool light. The other was human, rough with lines and scars. The human hand held a jagged, beautiful, multifaceted stone. The hand of light did not try to take it. It simply turned, palm up, underneath, in a gesture of receptive wonder. The offer was not for technology, or alliance, or even formal friendship. It was a request for a continued share of the storm. The galaxy had fallen silent in awe, and now, with a gentle, embarrassed clarity, it was asking for an encore. The request hung in the air, not as a demand, but as a gentle, open-handed question. The emissary waited, its luminous form a patient star in the high orbit. On Earth, the pressure was immense, but it was a new kind of pressure. It was not the fear of saying the wrong thing to a powerful enemy. It was the anxiety of an artist asked to explain their messy, beloved work to a revered master. A global council formed in haste, but the decision, in the end, was not political. It was instinctual. Mina, speaking from the KDSA with Jinwoo and Subin at her side, became the voice for the consensus. "We don't send them a manifesto," she said to the council. "We don't send them our greatest hits, curated and polished. We send them us, the raw material." The concept was approved. They would send a data package, a reply to the gift of perfect harmony, a package of human fervor. Jinwoo and Subin worked for 48 hours straight, not sleeping, fueled by a strange shared purpose. They were not engineers building a device. They were librarians assembling a living poem. They gathered files, not from official government archives, but from the global cultural stream, the chaotic, beautiful noise of humanity. They included a Mozart requiem, its sorrow structured into breathtaking beauty. Next to it, they placed a field recording of a lone busker in a Seoul subway, singing a folk song with a cracked, heartfelt voice. They included a serene ink-wash painting by a master. Beside it, the frenetic, colorful splash of a child's finger painting. They added the precise, elegant lines of a neural network's code. Then, they added the handwritten, smudged equations from a student's notebook with a frustrated coffee stain in the corner. They included high-definition footage of an Olympic 100-meter final, the pinnacle of human physical performance. Right after, they added shaky cell phone video of an old man in a park, taking his first wobbly walk after a hip surgery. His face a map of pain and determination. They included the sound of a thunderstorm over a mountain range, and the sound of a mother humming to a restless baby. They included a transcript of a great, inspiring speech about unity, and a transcript of a heated, illogical, but deeply felt argument between two friends about a movie. They called it the Human Index. It was not a summary. It was a sampling. Captain Lee from the Gyeongbok provided the final piece. He did not send tactical readouts or manifests of peace. He sent the unedited visual logs from his station over the past week. The view of Earth, spinning in its fragile beauty. The view of his crew's faces etched with worry, then wonder, then a dazed kind of hope. He sent a clip of two junior officers sharing a quiet joke during a calm moment, their laughter sudden and bright in the tense silence of the command deck. It was a view of the protectors, not as warriors, but as people, deeply moved and unsure. The data package, a strangely small file for all it contained, was beamed toward the emissary. There was no fanfare. The entire planet seemed to hold its breath. The emissary received it. The luminous form pulsed once, a deep, acknowledging throb of light. Then it did something unexpected. It did not process the data privately. It opened itself. It became a lens, projecting the contents of the Human Index directly back into the galactic record carrier wave. But this time, it amplified the signal. It was sharing humanity's reply with the entire consensus network. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, the silent galaxy spoke. It was not a voice. It was a reaction, a disturbance in the signal. The clean, harmonious river of consensus communication rippled. The ripple became a wave. The data streams, which had flowed with such serene logic, suddenly showed spikes of chaotic, unfamiliar patterns. On Jeju, Jinwoo watched his monitors in disbelief. There, feeling it, he breathed. The annotations coming back now were not clinical. They were shattered. A tag for the busker's song flickered. Imperfect vocalization gives direct neural empathy, cascade gives unforeseen emotional resonance. The student's coffee-stained equations provoked a flurry. Error alongside pursuit of truth gives aesthetic of struggle, gives more valuable than perfect solution. The wave built. The Mozart Requiem juxtaposed with the mother's hum created a feedback loop of analysis about structured verses. Unstructured mourning. The Olympic sprint next to the old man's walk broke their understanding of victory. The consensus was trying to process contradiction not as an error, but as the central point. Then came the peak. It was the two clips they had placed side by side, almost as a joke. The majestic thunderstorm and the mother's lullaby. The galactic record, for the first time in recorded human observation, stuttered. A massive, system-wide query flashed across every linked terminal on Earth that was tuned in. It was a single, frantic, collective thought from a trillion minds. How can the universe's fury and a single being's tenderness generate the same neuro-responsive pattern of awe? The emissary itself seemed to tremble in orbit, its light fracturing into prismatic colors for an instant. The wave of raw, processed human emotion, the joy, the sorrow, the struggle, the love was flooding a neural network built for calm. It was not an attack. It was an overload of meaning. On the Gyeongbok, alarms sounded not for weapons, but for a massive, non-threatening energy fluctuation from the emissary. Captain Lee watched as the being of light pulsed like a heart. Rhythmic waves of color washing over it, deep blues of sorrow, bright golds of joy, fiery reds of passion colors it had likely never needed to manifest before. It was experiencing a synesthesia of the soul. The silence that followed was different. It was the silence of aftermath. The galactic network did not go quiet. It buzzed with a low, stunned hum, like the ringing in one's ears after a beautiful, devastating concert. The perfectly composed symphony of their civilization had just been joined by a jazz band, a weeping choir, a shouting poet, and a laughing child, all at once. Slowly, the emissary's form stabilized. It sent one last, clear concept to Mina, to Jinwoo, to Captain Lai, and to the waiting heart of humanity. It was not a thought, but a pure sensory experience, the feeling of a deep, ancient thirst being quenched by water you never knew existed. The gift was reciprocated. They had given the galaxy perfect harmony. Humanity had given them the storm, and the quiet eye within it. And the galaxy, in its awe, had finally found its voice again, not to speak, but to feel, and to weep, and in its weeping, to feel more alive than it had in millennia. The great disruption settled, not into the old silence, but into a new kind of quiet. It was the quiet of a deep breath held after tears, of a page being carefully turned. The galactic record still flowed, but its song had changed. The harmonies were still there, but now there were whispers of melody that bent in unexpected, beautiful ways. A faint, rhythmic pulse that felt like a heartbeat had been woven into the background hum. The emissary did not leave. Its shimmering form remained in orbit, a silent sentinel in an open channel. But its purpose had shifted. Captain Lee, from the deck of the Gyeongbok, understood first. The entity was no longer an observer or an ambassador. It was a student. And Earth had become, improbably, a university. No treaties were signed. No technologies were exchanged. Instead, The consensus proposed a cultural reciprocity protocol. It was not an alliance of power, but an alliance of perception. They asked permission to establish a permanent, passive link away to continue to experience the human spectrum in real time as a source of inspiration. In return, they offered something far stranger than anti-gravity or replicators. They offered context. They began to gently tag human broadcasts, not just with analysis, but with connections. A new Korean film about loss would have a soft, appended note. Asterisk, resonance detected in the stellar nursery elegies of the Cygnus Rim cultures, circa 4.2 million Earth years ago. They, too, sang of beautiful things that must end. Asterisk, a breakthrough in ecological science, was linked to similar conceptual leaps in 5 other species' histories, creating a shared galactic timeline of intellectual fervor. Humanity was not just creating art in a vacuum. They were adding new, vibrant threads to a tapestry that spanned the galaxy. The loneliness of the cosmos was being filled, not with voices saying, "Hello," but with voices saying, "Ah, we felt that too once." Jinwoo and Subin, in the now famous control room on Jeju, became curators. Their job was no longer to listen for threats, but to manage the gentle, constant flow of this two-way stream. They helped translate human experiences into packets the consensus could safely absorb, and interpreted the gentle, awestruck feedback that flowed back. Mina stood with the emissary one last time. Not in person, but in a shared mental space facilitated by the link. They watched a sunset from a vantage point over the Pacific. The sky blazed with orange and purple. "It is a stellar process," the emissary communicated, its concepts now tinged with a warmth that felt almost human. "The scattering of light. We have observed it on 8,742 worlds." "Yes," Mina agreed in her mind. "But here," the emissary continued, and a wave of pure, unadorned feeling washed over Mina. It was the feeling of the sunset. Not the science, but the weight of it. The melancholy of the day ending, the promise of rest, the sheer, breathtaking beauty of the color. It was the sunset filtered through a consciousness that had just learned to feel it. Here it is a story, a daily, quiet drama of ending and hope. You do not just see a process. You give it meaning. You make the universe poignant. Mina smiled. "We make it messy. You make it real," the emissary corrected gently. On the Gyeongbok, Captain Lee gave the order that would have been unthinkable 2 months before. He stood down the primary weapon systems. The shields remained, the sensors alert, but the aggressive targeting protocols were archived. A new directive was issued to all global defense platforms: observe, protect, and contextualize. They were not just soldiers of a nation anymore. They were stewards of a unique and cherished world, a role that felt both heavier and more honorable than any war. The change was not in grand galactic politics, but in small personal moments. A composer in Oslo, aware her music was being heard across the stars, did not write something grand and pompous. She wrote a simple, aching piece about the memory of her father's hands. A young poet in Nairobi wrote verses about the smell of rain on dry earth, and knew somewhere. Beings of light were trying to understand the concept of petrichor and the feeling of home it carried. The galaxy's silence had been broken not by a shout of challenge, but by a shared, shuddering breath of awe. And from that breath, a new harmony was being born, one that could finally include the wild, discordant, glorious notes of Earth. Years later, Jinwoo and Mina watched from a hillside on Jeju, near the now quiet array. The emissary was a distant, steady star in the twilight sky, the first of the resonance pods, gentle, non-intrusive satellites built with hinted-at consensus principles, or being assembled in orbit. Their sole function was to beam focused streams of human experience a festival here, a quiet library there deeper into the galaxy, like chapters of an ongoing serial. All that time, Jinwoo said, his voice soft, we thought we were shouting into the dark, trying to prove we were not alone. We were wrong. Mina nodded, leaning into him. We weren't shouting to get an answer. We were singing, and they weren't listening for a signal. They were listening for a song. They just didn't know what one was until they heard ours. Above them, the first stars appeared, but the sky no longer felt like a cold, empty void. It felt like a vast, attentive cathedral, holding its breath for the next note. The galaxy had encountered Earth and had fallen silent in awe. And in that sacred, grateful silence, both had finally found their true voice.